Good afternoon, everyone. This is Darlene McDermott. I'm the Director of Client Engagement for Magnet here at our Manufacturing Extension Partnership in Northeast Ohio. We're going to wait a few minutes and allow people to get into the webinar before we begin. And again, if you're just joining us, you are attending the Ohio Supply Chain Securing the Supply Chain webinar. We're just waiting a few minutes, allowing people to file into the webinar, and we will get started momentarily. We're at about half of capacity to who RSVP'd, so we'll give everyone just another minute or two. Let's go ahead and get things kicked off. Again, you are attending Securing the Ohio Supply Chain and Ohio Supply Chain Security. I'm Darlene McDermott, and I'm the Director of Client Engagement, along with my colleagues who also handle client engagement, Janelle Lee and Harry Eden. We cover all of Northeast Ohio, and we're so pleased to have you this morning. And I'm going to go through a couple of slides and present some texture and content to what we're talking about today. And after just a few slides, we will go ahead then. And I'd like to introduce to you my colleague, Joe Vinciquerra, who is our growth advisor who handles the implementation and partnership and supply work for this particular expertise of supply chain security with Max and Justice from Ignyte. And we will get to those introductions here in just a few minutes. If we could please transition to the next slide. I have lost the slides on my screen. Please bear with us while we have some technical Max, I have lost the screen presentation on the screen here. I can see everyone except the presentation.
So Max, just so you know, I can still see the presentation on my
Darlene,
slide.
did you turn on a secondary screen?
Yes, I did.
That could be part of the problem. It might be wanting to pop up on your secondary screen.
Okay,
So
it's actually, yeah,
turn that secondary screen off.
I did, but unfortunately, there's still there's no presentation on my screen. I do see a note from Patrick that there is on his. So what I would like to do is.
Do you have the view button at the top right-hand corner? Up on your Zoom screen under the X. Like where you see everyone's pictures, there should be a view button above that.
Yes, it's giving me a view transcript. I apologize. It is not behaving in any way that I'm familiar with. What I will do, Jamie, I'm going to ask Joe Vinciquerra if you.
Darlene, I actually have the mag. Joe, would you like to kind of go over the magnet slides perhaps?
Yes, I'm getting some freezing on the screen and I only heard my name, Max. Could you repeat what you said? I'm having
Sure.
some trouble too, it looks like.
Would you like to do the introduction for magnet? It seems like everybody's having connectivity issue, especially.
Yeah,
on-
yeah, can we move to the next slide, Max?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, good. So here's just an introductory slide for Magnet. This comes out of our a manufacturing survey we do every year. And, this just kind of indicates how important Ohio is to manufacturing and how important manufacturing employment is in Ohio. Ohio ranks number 3rd in the nation for manufacturing employment. Next slide, please, Max. And coming out of our most recent survey, it seems that everybody who's joined this webinar is on an important topic. It was the top growing concern for Northeast Ohio manufacturers in quite a few of our surveys, but certainly in the most recent ones. Next slide, Max. And just a little introduction about Magnet. We're a not-for-profit consulting firm comprising manufacturing experts who roll up our sleeves and transform smart ideas into top and bottom line company growth. You can see here that Magnet's aim is to add value. It's important to us that we check that we're creating jobs, new products are being manufactured, and the value of the companies is increasing. Next slide. Okay, and this is just a really high-level introduction to Magnet. We work on top-line growth, innovation and technology, and bottom-line efficiency. And the next slide will get us into a little bit of details. On top-line growth, we have services that we offer in business growth strategy, marketing strategy and execution, and sales enablement. And the next slide, Max. And in innovation and technology, we do a lot of work in product and process design and automation projects. We do new product and process development, and we incorporate new technologies, a lot of things like IoT, machine monitoring, robots. And a lot of our projects every year are in machines are around automation. So if you're looking for a custom machine, it's something that you can't just go buy out there on the market, then we'd love to have a chance to talk to you about that. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the bottom line efficiency work, skills development, leadership and culture, operational excellence, our quality projects fall in here. And our cyber projects kind of fall in all of these categories, actually, Max, when we look across top line innovation and bottom line. It crosses over into each of these areas. And next slide, I'm not sure what we have next year. Okay, and then this is just a kind of a summary slide that Magnet's goal is to support Ohio manufacturing in this journey to being the #1 in the United States. And I think we can move on to here's our introductions for Max and Justice. And so I'd like to thank Max for doing this webinar today. I've had the pleasure of working with Max and Justice at Ignyte Assurance Platform on quite a few projects. And we're excited to hear what Max has to say today. He has some new information that that I haven't seen in some of his webinars. And so I'm excited because I saw some topics in that first slide that that'll be interesting. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. You can reach out to myself or Max and any of the business development people at Magnet if you have any interest in some support on cyber. And Max, I think it's probably time where you could take over. I think we're back on schedule.
Awesome.
Hey, Max, I apologize, but this is Darlene, and I'm sure no one can read the chat because we're all trying to figure out our screens right now. And for some of us, it's still frozen on slide 1. But Joe, great job. And to everyone on the call, you've joined many of our webinars. You know that they're not normally quite like this, but at any rate, you roll with the punches. What I wanted to do real quick is I wanted to acknowledge our partners on the phone who actually made the webinar possible, and to whose constituents we're probably speaking to at this time, because I can't see the attendee list either right now. But I did want to call out a warm welcome. Again, thank you, Joe and Max. Before we get to Max and the implementation of this work, you know, obviously from what we've talked about, what everyone on the phone knows, manufacturing is key to growth in Ohio. We have just come through an amazing time during COVID where many manufacturers have redefined themselves. They have found themselves engaged in different supply chains. They've also found themselves selecting new supply chains. And with all of that growth comes some of the growing pains, which is what we're trying to talk about today to help everyone stay compliant and keep those supply chains in place. What I'd like to acknowledge is the just incredible, tremendous amount of work that has gone on in Northeast Ohio from our manufacturers, and thank them. Specifically, we have folks on the phone from the Greater Akron Regional Chamber of Commerce and also the Canton Regional Chamber of Commerce. Both of those partners, Colin Floyd, Greg Kramer, your leadership teams, you as leaders, and all the people that work with you, we appreciate what you do for the manufacturing community day in and day out. And as we look to Max's comments and we get further into this thing, the one thing I would ask is that we think about ourselves as a region. There's been a lot of talk about the Akron-Canton Metroplex, and that's a lot bigger than just Akron and Canton. Frankly, it's Cleveland all along the I-77 corridor. It's Canton, it's Akron, it's Ravenna, it's, you know, Dover, it's Strasburg, it's Hudson, it's Talmadge, it's Solon, it's all of our communities here in Northeast Ohio working together. So with that backdrop, which is a lot of what I just said in the beginning, again, Joe, great job. Thanks for pinch hitting as I'm still looking at slide 1.
And Darlene, if we could, we lost a little bit of our order on that first slide that got frozen over on your screen. And we were lucky enough to have Greg and Colin that both said they would make some introductory remarks. And so we had a little bit of time carved out for them, and we lost it in the order of things with the mix up on the slide. So if we could we double back, Max, before you start, and let Greg make his introduction that he was going to do, and then Colin?
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you. I'll make this rather brief. I'm Greg Kramer. I'm the Vice President of Economic Development at the Greater Akron Chamber. And on behalf of our President and CEO, Steve Millard, our 1,800 members, welcome to all the companies that are participating today. When the Greater Akron Chamber and the Canton Chamber, along with Magnet, planned this series at the beginning of the year, it really was looking towards hopefully a post-COVID environment, and we seem to be heading there. And when we're meeting with companies, cybersecurity has become an increasing topic of conversation. So I'm sure the information provided today will be very informative. We look forward to working with Ignyte going forward. And again, Joe and Darlene, thank you for this opportunity to partner.
Thank you, Greg.
I'll go next. This is Colin Floyd. I'm speaking on behalf of the Canton Regional Chamber of Commerce, and I just want to thank the team at Magnet for once again bringing this timely expert level content to our business community. We're just so grateful for our partnership with Magnet and helping better serve and educate our businesses. You know, over the past 2 years here in Stark County, you know, we've worked together with Magnet to launch the Magnet Innovation and Growth Center here at the Chamber. We've launched a brand new manufacturing sector partnership with the involvement and support of Magnet, which we're very excited about. And, you know, then of course we've partnered on these webinars, these free webinars with Magnet to really support our local businesses and what I think we can all agree is the most challenging time. And today's topic is no different. I think we've all seen the news and we all understand the critical need for a secure supply chain, both from a business and a national security point of view. So just to Magnet, thank you again for your leadership and for continuing to partner with our chambers.
All right, thank you, Greg and Colin, and thank you to everybody who's participating and for listening to the introductions. And now we'll get to the heart of the matter here, and Max, take us away with the topic we're here for.
Absolutely. So Greg Colin, Joe, Darlin, thank you so much for the opportunity to present here. So my name is Max Olick, and my background, I've always worked in information security. I started my career in the U.S. Air Force. So a lot of what you'll see and hear has a lot of elements from what the Department of Defense and the U.S. government is trying to accomplish when it comes to cybersecurity and supply chain risk management. So before we kind of dive into what we're going to talk about, we skipped over the agenda slide, but as a general theme, what we're looking to kind of get through today is what has been going on globally, right? Why are we seeing all of these attacks, and what are the specific attacks, and what does it matter to the small business? We'll also look at this administration, Biden. What are some of the new rules that are coming out? And then what is this new executive order that was just signed a few weeks ago, I believe. And then from a regional perspective, right? So somebody mentioned, hey, this is a corridor. It's a region for us, right? What are some of the supply chain best practices you can take away? What is this new terminology that you might hear of called CMMC, which stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model? And what is the difference between CMMC and just IT, right? Because a lot of folks look at IT as like, well, hey, I'll go get a firewall, and that's just, that's it for cybersecurity. And then also we'll cover what are some of the next steps you can take as a small business. Where's the help? And then also where are some additional resources that cost you next to nothing except for your dime? How can you learn about some of these things? So this is what we're going to cover today. I encourage you to ask questions, right? We've only got about 40 more minutes. This material is dense. There's a lot to unpack here. So we're not going to get through everything. So I encourage you to take notes, ask questions. I will leave some time towards the end. I always do. No matter how much material we have, we'll leave about 10 minutes till the end. If you have questions, I'll repeat the questions back to you, and I will try my best to answer them. If we don't get to them, we will actually reach back out to you through small little 5-minute video directly answering your question, because it impacts a lot of small businesses in our region, and we want to make sure that we address any concerns that you might have. So that's kind of how we go about doing this. So as the first thing, a lot of people ask us, hey, what is this Ignyte Institute? What is Ignyte platform? Our mission is to help small businesses, large businesses manage risk globally and at a corporate level. When we look at the highest areas of risk, it usually falls in 2 buckets today. Financials, hey, I don't have enough cash flow to buy my machines, things like that. That's where and why we team up with Ignyte, because they can help. And then the other area is anything along the lines of technology or digital risk. A lot of that is being described as cyber risk. So when we look at cyber risk, supplier risk, it's all because of your systems are interconnected. And that's what Ignyte Assurance Platform does. We actually enable you to manage this risk properly. You'll learn more about us as time goes on, but we're based here in Ohio, right next to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is our home state, and we help out a tremendous amount of businesses that are small in terms of how do you manage risk across the board. And it usually falls within the financial side, or it falls within the digital or the technology side. So that's a little bit about us. So now back to why we're here. So one of the things that you'll notice is that whenever you go out to the news channels, there's plenty of attacks and things like that happening today. A lot of people ask us and in general, hey, why is this happening? Have we not dumped enough money? Have we not fixed the problem yet? So think of it like this, right? So whenever there's a massive flood of some sort, let's say after Katrina or any kind of a flood that has happened, generally what you'll see is a lot of activity like looting and things like that, right? Well, cyber is no different. We are just getting past COVID, not all the way there yet. But what's starting to happen is a lot of the smaller businesses and larger businesses are starting to get hit, because guess what? A lot of our money that used to go overseas, it's not anymore. So there's a lot of attacks and different things happening that are coming from overseas, and they're directly targeted towards the supply chain. That's one of the biggest themes right now, is because how are you still able to get into Microsoft and some of the larger organizations? It's really through the smaller organizations. So one of the things I want to cover is CNA Financial, for example. That's an insurance company. Usually people say, well, if you can't cover your risk, just go get it insured, right? This was a cyber attack that happened on an insurance company, and guess what? They paid the ransom, and they eventually, even their reassurance providers most likely advised them to go ahead and pay the ransom and things like that, right? We've all heard about Colonial, Microsoft, and then there's the meat packaging company JBS, right? And we're not even through the full year. So a lot of attacks have been focused towards disrupting the supply chain, and then also companies that are heavy within the supply chain area. That's really what's going on. So how the government responds to this, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, actually has a mission to help out our what they call critical sectors, right? When we look at our critical sectors in the United States to maintain a healthy economy, almost all manufacturers are within that critical sector. There's others as well, right? There's 16 of them total. Defense industrial base being one of them. If you're working with the DoD, building machines, parts, anything that goes on any kind of weaponry, aircraft, or just the DoD purchases it for their own needs, that's one of the most diverse sector today that you'll hear about, right? And that's where CMMC is coming out of. But other things like healthcare, energy, communication, right? So everything within the economy, within our United States that supports the economy, the DHS has labeled 16 critical sectors. It would be good for you to figure out if you fall within any of those sectors. Most likely you do. But if you do without any kind of doubts, there might be some help that you can get in order to protect your digital assets and things like that, right? So that's the DHS's mission. It's a large mission to help secure our supply chain and also anybody that falls within the critical sector. So in order to respond to the cyber attacks, a lot of people usually ask, and some people ask, hey, what is the government doing about it? Is there anything happening on that front? Because we're paying into some sort of a tax system. So what's happening? So this is kind of a pretty bipartisan issue when it comes to cybersecurity. It doesn't matter if you're left, right, center. It impacts almost every citizen, and it impacts every company, and it impacts every single administration. Whenever a new administration comes in, we usually start to see new set of legislations, and usually there's some sort of an executive order for cybersecurity as well. So this executive order 14028, you'll start to hear about it more. I think it was just signed in May timeframe, so it just rolled out. But a lot of this talks about, whenever government procures something through their supply chain, how do we secure that supply chain? And what we're starting to see is some technical language, and a lot of it has to do with protecting software supply chain. There's a new concept that'll be introduced. It's called software bill of material. Just like if you're a manufacturer, there's a bill of material. They're now targeting software bill of material. And a lot of that has to do with, because of the software that you're using through your third-party supplier, whether it's your IT company or the cloud company that you might be using, and we're a cloud company as well. Is that software secure? Are you using it in its intended purpose? And what assurances do you have to make sure that that software is not going to create some sort of a vulnerability? The other terms that you might hear is zero trust architecture, secure cloud services, encryption. Those are some of the technical things that they're inserting, but by far a lot of this is aligned to existing standards that are already out there, NIST being one of them. And they really want you to take a programmatic approach on how to solve this, right? So that's the new executive order that that'll actually add to kind of what we have to do, and also how we help out a lot of the small businesses. So if you're within the defense industrial base, which after some research, a lot of companies are within the defense industrial base, there's about 600,000 small businesses in what's called the defense industrial base, right? And what this essentially means is that through some way, shape, or form, you sell to the Department of Defense. Now, you may not sell to them directly. You could be what's called a tier 4, 5, 6, or tier 2 supplier. But whatever you're making today, it's being procured by Department of Defense. And a lot of these requirements are flowing down to the last tier, right? So these are the 4 major DFARs rules that have been emerging and now are in place. DFAR stands for Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, right? So it all has to do with acquisition and supply chain to the US government. And they want you to manage it in a very similar way. So you'll look at the numbers here. It says 70, these are called 70 series, right? So 70, 12, 20, or 19, 20, 21. The last 2 digits really denote the year that it was approved, right? So as you can see, from 2012 to 2019, there wasn't much activity, but from 2019 to now, that's when some of these new rules have came out, and it kind of lines up with what we are seeing in terms of the attacks and things like that. Government has access to all sorts of intelligence, and when they start to see an uptick on certain kinds of activity, in order for them to protect the defense industrial base or the supply chain, they will start to make rules. And that's why you're starting to see aggressive rules against this, regardless of who's in the house and not, because the data and the information shows that our information systems, our supply chain is being exploited. A lot of your intellectual property that you're developing today, it's ending up overseas because a lot of this impacts a lot of small businesses, right? So a lot of times we don't do this for economical gain. That's not what the government is supposed to do. They're supposed to do it to protect the United States. So a lot of emerging legislations are coming out in order to protect the United States. So these are some of the things that we'll actually dive through on how you can actually apply these practices in your small business. So kind of in the military, we call it bluff, bottom line up front. Why do I care as a small business? And really, why should I even do this, right? We even noticed kind of the 3 major impacts to a small business. Number 1 is obvious. If somebody breaks in and if you have some product designs, if you have some customer list, if you have something that you consider intellectual property, that data is worth something, right? Internal data theft is the biggest concern for a lot of small businesses, right? Your data gets bought and sold all the time to your competitors as what they call intelligence services, right? So that's something to be very careful about, because a lot of intellectual property actually leaves the United States, and it really hurts the small businesses. The second area that we've seen a lot for small businesses is that if you implement technology in an incorrect way, it can create what we call operational inefficiencies, right? Because of compliance, you can shortcut the processes and quickly implement multiple firewalls, single sign-on, and all sorts of technical solutions. It's only going to make things complex. And then when there's complexity, what we start to notice is that people are not even really using the technology you put in place. So it's not effective, right? It's not efficient. And people are working around the technology, right? So you've spent the money and now nobody's using it. That's something that we're starting to see a lot in small businesses, because because we thought, hey, let's do this because it checks a box. But then your workforce, it doesn't matter if it's 5 people or 2,000 people, they're working around the controls that you have put in. So that can cost a small business quite a bit. The last thing, this is kind of a long tail effect, and this is happening in a lot of the larger businesses, the primes, is they are right now looking at their supply side risk, right? The traditional supply side risks are around capacity, around cost, performance, right? Diversity, those kinds of issues. Now, this cyber area is very much quickly moving and emerging, right? So a lot of the primes are really sizing up their supply chain and really looking at who is in and who is not in terms of how serious they're taking cybersecurity standards, right? Just like a decade ago or 2 decades ago, quality was a big issue. You had to get ISO 9000 and other quality standards. So now cybersecurity is becoming a very much a standard in terms of risk management. So that could create opportunities for you, but that could also disrupt your current revenue opportunities that you're pursuing. So these are the kind of bottom line upfront, 3 business impact that we're starting to see shift. We're starting to see these impact take place in small businesses. And we're talking to companies that are less than $1 million to all the way up to $200 to $300 million. These impacts are emerging right up to the CEO as the key issues that they have to take care of. So again, now let's talk about kind of tactically, what is small business security? How do you get that started? And what does that kind of look like? What does that journey look like? So I talk to a lot of CEOs. They ask me, they say, well, Max, we want you to help us, this, that, and the other. And it sounds like, it's just project management. Or, hey, my IT team is really doing all of these things. So why do I need to do cybersecurity? So let me tell you this, the cybersecurity name itself, it's a misnomer, right? It's misleading, actually. When we really look at all of the small businesses across the United States, 80 to 90% of them can't afford a CIO. They can't afford a chief risk officer. Forget about chief security officer, right? So a lot of your IT is actually being managed by an outsourced provider, an MSP or managed service provider. And that's good, right? It's all about division of labor. You're doing what you're really good at. The IT companies are doing what they're really good at. So they're part of this ecosystem, right? It's critical to partner with your IT provider. But at the same time, what you want to understand is that cybersecurity and risk management has more disciplines than just IT and firewall, right? And this is what we call risk advisory or risk management in general, right? So business disruption, crisis management, legal review to transfer risk properly or manage it. And then, of course, a lot of people talk about insurance, making sure that when you buy the insurance, it actually covers something, because a lot of times it doesn't cover anything, right? These are all of the disciplines that are packaged within cybersecurity because it's a new emerging discipline. And you could say it's only about 30 to 40% IT at the end of the day, right? So if you're going about doing cybersecurity and you say, well, I just rely on my legal, or I just rely on my finance, and I only rely on my IT, you're doing it the wrong way. It's actually a mixture of a lot of these disciplines. It impacts your cash flow. It impacts what kind of risk you're taking on, liability you're taking on. Those are kind of, we call them flow down requirements. And it certainly impacts your technology, right? So some of the things you want to start to think about is the technology providers that you're partnering with, are they able to provide you some level of assurance, right? In the same way, you would never hire an attorney that has never gone through any legal education. You wouldn't necessarily hire a technologist or a CPA that has never gone through any kind of financial courses, right? So taking these 3 to 4 disciplines together is what cybersecurity is, right? So that's something for you to understand as a small business. Don't just gravitate and deviate towards buying new hardware, buying new software. It really starts with the customers you have, what legal liabilities you're under, what laws you have to follow, and then what's the impact on business disruption when you implement some of those rules that you have to abide by. And then the technology becomes a supporting and an enabling function into cybersecurity. So when we look at cybersecurity, this is a fancy slide, but it applies to all small businesses. We call this starting with the internal side first, right? All the way from the left, people, and then your internal processes, the products that you're producing, whatever widget it might be, technology, putting some sort of a risk prioritization or the needs prioritization, conducting a corporate-wide risk assessment, and then having those follow-on assessments. This is what we call security from an internal perspective, or just cyber security from an internal perspective, right? So starting with the people side, if you don't have the manpower, you need to build a fractional team, right? You don't necessarily need a full-time CIO. You don't need a full-time legal counsel. A lot of times we're leveraging general counsel in a fractional capacity. Chief security officer and risk officers, they work the same way, right? starting with the people side, looking at your organizational functionally, regardless of if you have the people or not, what are those specialties you need? That's going to be the key, right? And then of course, looking at your products and processes from an internal perspective is important. A lot of small businesses we talk to, they sometimes have what we call COTS product, commercial off the shelf, and then you have the government furnished products, right? GFE, something that you're building for the government, right? Those could fall under what's called CUI. You'll start to hear that term, controlled unclassified information. Now, how you protect COTS information and CUI information, that's very different. But both of those information types really go into building your product, right? And that is what really reflects the technology, the kind of technology you should deploy, and the kind of technology that you probably currently have, right? Depending on the kind of products you build, right? And all of that requires some sort of ranking and stacking against prioritization, while also looking at your corporate risk, right? And when we talk about corporate risk, it says impact, threat vector, security engineering. Those are sub-risks. Really what we look at corporate risk is managing your financial area. If, for example, one of the things we always ask is, well, how much business are you doing in the DoD supply chain versus, let's say, healthcare, right? And if your growth goals are not in the DoD, one of the things we really look at is, should you be applying advanced security principles in your company, right? So corporate risk is really tied to your balance sheet, your cash flow, those sorts of metrics, and then we really relay that into your technology, because it's not about building the most secure environment. It's really about managing both financial and technology risk at the same time, right? So this is what we call security briefly from an internal perspective. Here's what we're looking at from an external perspective, right? So just like large businesses and the government themselves has a huge supply chain, almost every single small business also has a supply chain, right? So what we want to do is leverage some of those large businesses' practices in a way that doesn't create inefficiencies for small businesses. So these are some tactical steps you can take from a really a small business perspective, right? So basically kind of come up with a basic supplier program. You could just have 5 suppliers, right? I know for our business, we probably only have about 10 suppliers that are very critical. Put in basic policies and procedures, kind of look at what risk and how do you classify those suppliers, right? You can look at classification. Hey, do I spend a lot of money with this supplier? And if they go away, is that a disruption to my entire business, right? If you're in a certain type of manufacturing and you have to get certain types of goods and services from another supplier, what happens if that supplier is no longer around, right? So we call those kinds of suppliers critical contractors, where you have the highest value being shifted from your firm to another. The other area that we want you to take a look at is who has the most data and access, right? Because that's what cybersecurity is about. To some point is the government doesn't really care for the tool that you're building. They care for the data that's being used to produce that tool, right? Because guess what? If somebody else has that data, China or here in the United States, they can produce that same kind of tooling and underbid you and undercut you, right? And that's really what's been happening largely. So you want to look at your critical vendors who have data and who has access to that data, right? A lot of times that falls within your IT supply chain, right? Your IT MSPs. So it is critical to train them up and socialize the programs to them that they're implementing these practices in their own shop, right? So as they're helping you with basic hygiene is what we call it, right? You got to make sure they are doing some of the same things, that they're not reusing same passwords and they don't have one person accessing 100 different clients, because guess what? All it takes for a hacker is to get to that one company, one individual. Now they have access to hundreds of different suppliers. So the audit process, and really when you implement security, that is very important. Who has access to the actual data and where is it flowing from inside of your organization to outside of your organization? It doesn't have to be complex and complicated, right? A lot of this is distilled within contracts and legal matters, and that's where we ask you to look. And if some of those elements are missing, those are things that we need to put in place, right? That you should put in place. The next thing is, once you've kind of identified, right, who needs to kind of look at this, we want you to socialize this to your suppliers because it's going to be a shock to them, right? And then after that, you can develop and conduct the assessments and automate the program. So here we've got about 20 more minutes. I'm going to run through these slides quickly, and then I want to leave some time for any Q&A. Again, I encourage you to ask some of these questions. Some folks have asked, hey, will the presentations will be available? You will get all the material, but if you have any questions, and if you're a small business, please type them out, because I will leave some time for you guys, right? So, okay. So real quick, what is CMMC? CMMC stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model. You'll start to hear about this as the government starts to manage their own supply chain concerns. And the Cybersecurity Maturity Model is in 5 levels, level 1 through level 5. Most of the supply chain is going to be falling within level 3. If you're serious about working with the government, most likely you'll have to do level 3. If you're just work with them in very little capacity, meaning that you don't have a strategic contract, that's really what level 1 and 2 is for. Level 4 and 5, we don't quite understand. The standard is still being rolled out, right? So again, the big question is always, which level is right for you? We always advise on level 3. Here's the couple of reasons why. One of the other supplementary guides you'll start to hear about is something called NIST 171. That's an open standard that's available to the public. The standard itself is baked into the legislations we were talking about earlier, right? So when I said, hey, there's 4 rules and they came out in 7012, the series 2012 to 2021, a lot of those legal requirements have NIST 171 baked into it, right? So level 3 really, it says all requirements specified in 171, right? So we call that kind of implied risk management by the government. The government really wants you to shoot for level 3, unless you're really not serious about CMMC and working with the government, or really not, really just want to get a good start on fundamentals of cybersecurity as an open framework. They want you to shoot for level 3 to start with, and then really go above and beyond that. But if you have more questions, reach out to us. We will help you distill which level you should be going after. Kind of looking at your business from a strategic standpoint, sales pipeline, revenue, contractual obligations. Those are some of the inputs we look at in order to determine which level you should be at, right? So how do you start your journey? At a very, very high level, right? Start with a strategy. Start with a clear understanding of what is it that you want to do? Where is it that you want to go? If you start with a firewall, you're starting at the wrong end of the problem, right? Start with, from your core business, where do you guys sell? Where do you want to do business? What kind of contractual obligations are you under? And is your business even registered to do business with the government? We found out a lot of small businesses, they're supplying to the government, but they're not even registered, right? So start with a clear strategy, strategic outcomes for business growth. That is very important. All this cybersecurity mumbo jumbo is critical, but it's going to be missing if the strategy is not there. You're going to overspend building, we call it kind of a Fort Knox environment while your business is not supporting it, right? So start with that. And then after that, we encourage you to partner. Your existing ecosystem is very important, right? So as I mentioned, 70 to 80% of all small businesses are being managed by an external provider, right? So it's very important to partner with your IT supplier, but really insert in risk advisory before that, because it's all about managing and transferring the risk, right? So if your IT company says, hey, we got it all, well, get that legally documented, not through a quote saying, okay, if something happens, now you are accountable and we are transferring risk to you. Just like large primes are transferring their risk down to you. You have to transfer that risk transparently down to your suppliers that you're working on, right, or working with. So that's what we call risk advisory, and you have to partner with the folks that you're already working with in order to make that happen. The last thing is, instead of creating something custom, a lot of people come in and say, oh, we'll create a custom framework or a standard for you. You have already paid into the tax system, so leverage the CMMC standard that's out there, and it's really there to really help you, right? So if you create something new, it's harder to manage. There's not a lot of knowledge transfer that's happening. So we encourage you to take a look at CMMC as a starting point, something that's designed to help you. And we all contributed to it as U.S. population. We pay taxes, and that's what the government has produced for us to work towards. So the other thing is, again, I'm going to leave some time. I do have some I see some questions are flowing in. Where can you go, right? The most important thing about this is taking ownership of the knowledge. So I encourage you to reach out to Ignyte Institute. It's a website, it's a learning management system completely funded by the Department of Defense. It walks you through, from a senior management perspective, what is it that you need to know from a procurement standpoint, and at a very high level, under 20 minutes, how do you mobilize your workforce, small or big, doesn't matter how big your company is, to take advantage of this new framework called CMMC. There's also a practitioner level course for an hour or two if you want to deep dive into any of these topics. So if you have a CFO, operations officer, compliance officer, anybody that's doing administration, we encourage them to take that course. Pretty cheap. It's like $100 some. If you reach out to us, we sometimes even give this information for free. A lot of it is hosted on YouTube and those kinds of things. The other training website, it's by DoD. It's called securityhub.usalearning.gov. Again, you'll get all of this content. This is the DoD website on how to mark information properly, right? Because they want you to mark your intellectual property. We formally call that a data classification scheme, because if you don't know what is supposed to be secure, you're not going to put technology around it, right? And so DoD also provides training as well, and that's available to all the small businesses for free. The good thing about these training is that you do receive some sort of a certificate, and that all of that goes towards your audit and compliance, right? You could sit through a lot of training, but if you don't have proof that you've done it, then we can't have any assurance behind the training and things like that. So audits will come sometimes in the future. That's another topic, but start to gather evidence, and this training, free training, is an excellent way to do it. So again, this is just a little bit about, the 3 courses that I mentioned. And again, just to kind of close it out, Ignyte Assurance Team, we kind of help you with a lot of these areas. So key takeaways, and I'm going to pass it over to maybe Joe. We'll read some questions together. So again, why we're doing this, there's multiple attacks on suppliers, right? We looked at all the kind of the high level case study. There's an executive order in place. We want you to go ahead and get trained, take ownership of the knowledge so you can start transferring your risk, right? That's exactly what's happening to you as a small business. You're starting to see these requests because the larger businesses are transferring their risk, and you have to do the same kind of implementation within your organization. And then of course, if you need help, reach out, email me, email us, email Joe, email Magnet. We do build a lot of these trainings, and we generally give all of these out for free. We post them on YouTube and all sorts of different areas, but please reach out with your business specific questions so that we can be of more help. So I'm going to pass it over to perhaps Darlin or Joe while I review some of these questions, and then see if I can answer at least 2 to 3, because we've got about 10 more minutes.
Thanks. Hey, Max, real quick, I just want to reference a question that was asked in the chat box. Joe's going to respond to Patrick directly because we have a working relationship, but for the sake of everyone on the call, a question did come up around if Ignyte has some capabilities And if not, who does, for taking and integrating hardware and firmware and software solutions and physically testing it across known risks, and would be able to provide, what I would call pen testing, or a report on vulnerabilities, or even suggestions for mitigations. Do you want to field that publicly too, Max?
Sure, sure. So, so first of all, Patrick, thank you so much for asking that. When it comes to hardware, firmware, those kinds of things, that is in our wheelhouse. That is what we call, in the DoD side, we call it platform IT, right? Weapon systems, those kinds of capabilities. It's certainly something we can do and something we have done with a lot of comfort. One thing I will tell you, though, is that is phase 2 of the supply chain risk management. Right now, phase 1 is around the basic kind of, getting the program in place, managing your IT properly, managing risk. And then phase 2, the government really wants to look at the machines. I was telling actually Joe about this. There's a project where we're doing right now with the 16th Cyber Command, and it's really targeted towards platform IT, goes directly into the hardware, into the machines themselves of different sorts, looks at firmware, and tries to inventory them, secure them, harden them, and then provide feedback directly to the developers on the things they can do from an architectural and programming perspective to fix some of those things. But absolutely, that is something that we do generally for a larger organization.
And Max, just as a follow-up, we are going to, you and I will have a meeting with Patrick, who asked that question. We'll probably have a phone call, and I'll talk to you about that later today. We do have another question in the Q&A, and I'll go ahead and read that. Can the CMMC accreditation package be used by a MSP to manage their client's compliance?
Right. So I'm glad an MSP is asking this question. So first of all, what each client will have their own CMMC assurance, right? So each entity has their own, and then the MSP, the IT provider, will need to have their own. And the concerns are very different, right? The small business manufacturer, they're worried about their CUI, things like that. But the MSP also has access to hundreds of clients. Hopefully you guys are a successful MSP where you have access to different clients. So you're going to need your own accreditation package, right? To really develop what we call a shared responsibility matrix. For each and every control, what are the things you're providing out of the box, not necessarily as a service, but how are you ensuring that there's no reuse of passwords, that there's not just one person managing 100 different clients. So you will have to have your own accreditation package that's going to look, feel, and be very different than your client's accreditation package, right? They're a machine shop, you're an IT shop, and there's those kinds of controls when you're looking at how they apply to an IT shop, those are very different. But yes, you're on the right path, whoever asked that question, and you should be seeking to get your own entity credentialed. That's really going to help you capture that market and really partner with those that you're serving in a very much with the highest level of integrity. We're not seeing a lot of that. So I encourage you to kind of move towards that direction independently.
Thank you, Max. This is Darlene, and I think that we have seen all of the questions. So for respect of time, we want to make a few closing comments around how to engage if something piqued your interest today, and how that might look. So before we do that, Max, is there anything else from your end?
No, I thank you everyone for their time, and yes, please reach out as Darlene will provide the directions, but would love to answer any other questions you have.
Thank you, Max. So in the time that we've met, 3 or 4 companies have already directly messaged that they would just like to engage on next steps. But again, for the sake of all attendees, and we are very near 100, the way this would look is, please feel free to reach out to Joe Vinciquerra directly. We had flashed, for those of you who could see it, his information, as well as my own, or Janelle Lee, or Harry Eden, depending on where in Ohio you are. We will get you to the right place. What the next steps would look like is you would have a discovery meeting with Joven Sequeira and Max here, who presented to us today from Ignyte, to see where you are on the journey and where the steps would look like for us to engage. How we work together is we partner with Ignyte to deliver this compliance work for you, the manufacturer. And the pricing for that is greatly reduced because of our partnership and because, again, we are the state manufacturing extension partnership. And therefore, we do have the state and federal funds to greatly augment the cost. It is not free. Certainly the discovery conversation is, but the actual work that would be implemented is much cheaper than if you were to go out on your own and try to negotiate with 3 or 4 or 5 different vendors for each part of the journey without the protection of the type of oversight that we can give you. So it's almost not even just about dollars and cents. It's about having that consistent guide through the process to be able to manage all of the different really types of technical implementation that you need to really address it in a holistic way that we've described today. So with that, giving you a few minutes back on your calendar, again, I really appreciate the Greater Akron Chamber, the Canton Regional Chamber, who partnered with us to make this program possible today. I thank Max profusely and his team from Ignyte, Joven Sequeira, my partner in crime, Harry Eden, Janelle Lee, Kristen Bainan, Jamie Dixon. Thank you all so much for making today possible. And lastly, most importantly, the participants. Thank you for joining us today and for asking the questions. And mostly, thanks for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. Have a great week ahead, everyone. Thank you.